and remember the wonderful and beautiful life of Julia Nell May, Julie Big Red May, Mom, Grandma, or whatever you chose to call her out of your love and affection for her. We are also here to encourage one another and for us to have some closure. It is a blessing to be here with all of you and to reflect fondly on her life. If you would, please join me in a prayer. Gracious and loving Jesus, I come to you today with the spirit of remembrance and love as we reflect on the life of Grandma May. In your word, we read there is a time for everything under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, and a time in between that to live. Julia Nell May lived a great life, and I ask you to be with us as we share about and reflect on the great living that she did, because she definitely did a lot of it. Grant us your peace, comfort, and bless us with your grace. Amen. I will now read a life sketch of her life, and it's on the back of your program if you'd like to follow along with me. Julia Nell May, a devoted wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, passed away at Pinecrest Retirement Community in Lufkin, Texas on June 26 after a short illness. She was 87. Born September 12, 1932, near Coker, Alabama, outside Tuscaloosa, she graduated from Tuscaloosa County High School before marrying the man of her dreams, Benjamin F. May, in 1951. They moved to Demopolis, Alabama, where she had 4 sons in quick succession in the mid-1950s. And the family then moved in 1965 to Lufkin, where Ben was named the manager of the Borden Chemical Plant in Diboll. In the mid-1970s, she and Ben moved to Columbus, Ohio, for job-related reasons before moving back to Texas in 1978 because of the same. She worked for Sears in all 3 states, and they never left Texas after that return, eventually moving back to their house in Lufkin upon retirement, and then to Pinecrest in 2012. Julia was a devout Christian and longtime member of Calvary Baptist Church in Lufkin. She was also a staunch Alabama fan, Roll Tide, an ardent supporter of any endeavor her sons pursued, and at one point a talented pianist and seamstress. She was preceded in death by her husband, Ben, and by 2 of her sons, Ben II and Mike, all of Lufkin. She is survived by 2 sons, Tim of Hilliard, Ohio, and Tony of Houston, and by 2 widowed daughters-in-law, Annette and Tasha, both of Lufkin. She is also survived by grandchildren Lisa Brissett, Cody Toops, Melissa May, Austin May, Tucker May, Kyle May, Corey May, Caroline May, Melissa Weaver, and Emily Garcia, and by great-grandchildren Trinity and Will Brissett, Callie and Benjamin Toops, Owen May, Jackson and Jordan Weaver, Nikki Page, Hayden and Allie Garcia, and by great-great-grandchildren, Sweet Peyton and Sweet Rain. The family gives their deepest thanks to her friends from the Calvary Baptist Church, now Life Point Church community, who sustained her, especially after the passing of her husband years ago. And we express our fathomless thanks to the staff of Pinecrest. I definitely agree with this, one of the greatest places on this earth. and we were moved by the comfort provided by the staff of Hospice in the Pines these last few months.
We're about to have a song performed that my oldest brother, Ben, many of you know, he was an aspiring musician, had probably 20 spiral notebooks full of different songs he had written. But this is a song that he had written in honor of my dad, and then my nieces here rewrote the song. But before we start that, I would like to have one just moment of silence here. Our sister-in-law, her daughter-in-law, Annette May, was placed into the hospital yesterday just for some tests, but she's having some issues to deal with right now with her own health. So while they're getting set up, let's have a moment of silence. Thank you. Amen. Now, as the introduction, these two ladies here, it is Melissa May, the daughter of Michael Bruce May, and then also Cody Toops, who is the daughter of Benjamin Franklin May II. And then accompanying them on the guitar is Brother Jared Toops. But these two girls have been such a big part of my mother's life, and from the time they were babies all the way through. And then one of the sweetest parts of her life, I think, has been the last 8 years, hanging out with them when they would show up and go to lunch or whatever and just hang out. And she was just one of the girls, and which was indicative of a post that Melissa put out of Mother right after she had passed. But please welcome them, and I think you'll enjoy the song. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of words really quick, I promise. I'm not going to take over. Cody and I used to put on shows for our grandma and granddaddy in their living room in Trinity. We had all the dress-up clothes little girls could ever dream of, and I'm sure I was usually in charge of the program and song selections. But Cody and I always figured out how to do it in the end. Our daddies were always performers, showing out since they were young. And over the years, my Uncle Ben wrote many songs. Some were just short stories put to music. Some were heartfelt love songs and some about the Lord. Some were never recorded because they were just too incriminating. But they were always about something that he loved. Alabama Man, which my Uncle Tony talked about, was one of my favorites. And it was about our granddaddy. About 3 years ago, Cody and I took our first annual trip to Tuscaloosa. And on the road, we started reworking some of the lyrics to Alabama Man to be able to sing it for our grandma. We put it away for a while and brought it back out to the drawing table several months back. We recently finished it, and in God's perfect timing, felt we should still perform it for her. Now, we didn't often let anyone join the May Girls when we would perform, but today, Mr. Jared Toops is going to help us out on Cody's daddy's guitar. It's a 12-string, guys, a 12-string. I've got my daddy's bass back here, but it's just for looks. Those lessons aren't quite paying off yet, so I'm not going to torture you with that. But needless to say, let's do some playing and singing. You ready?
Down in the heart of Dixie, the black warrior flows. Daddy's girl was born, so the story goes. Cost a $20 gold piece. She was the apple of his eye. She was weaned on collard greens and cornbread on the side. Baby girl red, baby girl red, baby girl red, baby girl red. where she went to school. Every day she'd hold books for her friend Mary Lou. She caught the eye of an older guy. She was his precious jewel. They married young and had some sons, and always went to Sunday school. Big Mama Red, piano player, Sunday dinner. Big Mama Red, it's hard to leave her daddy when they headed west. They ended up in Lufkin, where they all did their best. Busy with 4 boys, finally got their family raised. But through it all, she never forgot those Coker, Alabama days. Grandma Red, Trinity Cove, Sears for years. Grandma Red, Great Mom Red, Bible reading, chocolate eating. Great Mom Red, Alabama football, roll tide roll. That's Big Red, that's Big Red.
I was a little surprised they let me into the May Girls, but I was definitely thankful to join and to be a part of that today. So, when I think about the wonderful and beautiful life of Julie May, I think about a lot of different things. She definitely lived a very full life. And there were elements in her life that she lived all the time: faith, hope, love, and peace. And what I come away from every time that I spoke with her was how much she loved me, how much she loved Cody, of course, how much she loved our kids, and how blessed I was to have her in my life. I only wish that I could have met Cody sooner so I could have had more time with her. And what I was thinking about was 1 Corinthians 13, which speaks about the value of love. And at the end of the chapter, in verse 13, it says, "And now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love. But love is the greatest of these," or the greatest of these is love. She definitely lived a colorful life, and maybe more specifically a crimson-filled life, where faith, hope, and love were definitely a part of it. And I remember whenever I would go and talk to her, she'd always ask me about how I was doing. Whatever endeavor I was involved in at the time, she'd want to know what was going on with it. And she was never short of good questions to ask or good comments to make. She was very witty that way. And I remember thinking about what to include today whenever I was planning it. And then I found out that Tony had picked the 23rd Psalm to be put in the program for our service today. And as I was reading it, it was easy for me to see elements of faith, hope, and love in the psalm, and as it relates to the way that she lived her life. And I look at the first part of this, and it says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside still waters." She was a very busy woman. She had 4 boys. She was following her husband wherever they went, and she did a lot of things to support her husband, to raise her children. So there were times where she needed to lie down, where she needed to be still, where she needed to rest. And she trusted in the Lord to help her in those times, to help her to find rest for her soul, to help her to find peace when she needed it. And I know that whenever she had her stroke, I imagine that was a very hard time for her. I didn't know her before her stroke, but I heard about a lot of different things that she did before she had her stroke, and how active she was, and how much she enjoyed being outdoors and going and traveling and doing a lot of different things. But she didn't let that stroke stop her. She still kept going and kept on pursuing and kept on living her life the best way that she could. She was always smiling when I saw her. She always had something good to say, something nice to say. And I remember whenever we would go to Pinecrest, she would call us her wrecking crew. And that's what she would tell all her friends, that her wrecking crew was coming up to see her at Pinecrest. And I don't know if we ever wrecked anything, but we definitely were loud and maybe woke up some of her neighbors from time to time. And then I think about the next part of the verse, of the psalm rather, and I think about what she's doing now. She's at the place that God has prepared for her. She's sitting at his banqueting table and enjoying heaven. And she has been anointed by God, and she is with him. And she knew how to experience goodness and mercy for sure here on earth, but now she's experiencing it in a totally different way in heaven. And she knew that her house was the house of God here on earth. And now she's in the eternal house of the Lord in heaven. When I was thinking about stories to tell, it was hard to pick just one or two because there's so many. But I remember one time I kept Benjamin at home, and Cody took Callie to see her. And the first thing she said is, "Where's Benjamin?" She didn't like the fact that he stayed home with me. But Cody told me that she was thankful for it because it made it easier on her because Callie was a little more independent than Ben at that point in time. And I remember whenever we would go and do something, whether she could come with us or not, I still felt like she was with us because her spirit kind of resonated amongst us all. And I'm very thankful that Cody made it an effort for us to go see her, for us to be with her. And I just hope that as we live our lives, that we can remember the way that she lived her life. Now, I know that life was lived a little differently back then, whenever she was younger. But the elements of faith, hope, love, and peace are still there. It can still be a part of our lives today, for sure. So I hope that in your life, you can live a life of faith, of hope, of love, and of peace. Because that's the way that she lived her life. And those pictures that we saw before the service started, those were great pictures. And I think we saw a lot of love, a lot of faith, a lot of hope in those pictures. And I thank her for welcoming me into the family with open arms and for loving me for who I was. And I'm thankful to have been here today, to remember her and to honor her life. Thank you.
My name is Tim May. I was the second son of Julia Nell May and Benjamin Franklin May. That's why I'm here today. But if I wasn't the second son of Julia Nell May and Benjamin F. May, and I had met Julia Nell May, I'd probably be here today anyway, just like you folks are. Because anybody who got to know my mom, who was an incredibly private person, but man, when she lets you in, am I correct? When she lets you in, she lets you all the way in. And, I was just commenting, we were talking before this service started, and I've been saying this for like months now, when I told folks that my mom was 87 years old when she passed, and you go, well, she led a good life. She had a lot of years. And I go, yeah, but we kind of got used to having her around, right? Absolutely. Have an amen there? Yeah. But the bottom line was we all go sometime or another. As Tony, my brother, and I discussed many, many times, the way she was her last 6 months of her life was not the way she wanted to be. Not the way she wanted to be remembered. She wanted to be remembered, actually, she would never have condoned this. My mom was very private. I think her idea was mix her ashes with my dad's and put her in the ground and move on with your life. But this is for us. This is for us to remember what she meant to us, and vice versa. And my mom, when people have asked me to describe her, it's interesting because all kinds of things come to mind. I think of her, you heard about the cosmopolitan man. Well, my mom was the cosmopolitan woman. I mean, think about it, Tony. She popped us out in over a little span over 5.5 years. 4 sons, one very handsome and the others kind of struggling. But the bottom line is she raised us. She had a job at Sears. My dad worked all day and he'd come home tired. Remember, Tony? And come in, maybe shoot a hoop with us a little bit, but go in, have his dinner, and pretty much relax. That was just when my mom started working, doing the laundry, or she cooked. How many times did we go out to eat in the span of our lifetime with our mom and dad? Not very many, because my mom home-cooked meals. But she also had a job at Sears Roebuck that she worked. When we moved here to Lufkin, she learned Fortran, which was the early computer programming methods you did with these cards. She was ahead of her game. She always wanted to be on the cutting edge of whatever it was she was. I mean, she was incredibly intelligent. She could type faster than any person known to man. I wish I'd picked up that trait after I became a sports writer. I rue that day forever. But she was an incredible typist. She played the piano. Correct, Tony? We used to have, I don't know, family sing-alongs. I wasn't involved because I never could carry a tune in a bucket, much less with my throat. But my brothers, Ben and Mike, and my dad thought he could sing. Tony thinks he can sing. But the bottom line is we would have occasional moments where everybody gather around the piano and sing with my mom playing. She knew she couldn't sing just like me. That was the gene I inherited. But past that, she took us everywhere. She's the one who took us to our Little League practices. She's the one who, I was a pretty good little ball player the first 2 years, but then some things happened, and I was afraid to step into the batter's box and hang in there and swing away. And I tried to keep getting walks my first year in Little League for the Lloyd Jones Chevrolet team. We had great uniforms. It was fantastic. My mom finally pulled me aside, and she goes, Tim, the ball is not going to hit itself. You have to swing the bat. So when you get back up in this game, as we're riding to the little baseball field in Demopolis, swing the bat. Lo and behold, first pitch was high, almost hit me in the head. That's one of the reasons I was backing out, right? Self-preservation. But the next pitch was right there, and I swung, and the ball popped up, went to the second baseman. He camps under it. I'm already fired up because I've hit the ball, and I'm running, and he drops the ball. Ladies and gentlemen, that's called divine intervention, spurred by my mother, Julia Nell May. That's the kind of, she could make things happen if she put her mind to it. And such it was with us. But she was always there, right? When y'all needed my mom, she was always there. I'll never forget, first grade, I'm 6 years old, made straight A's. A lot of people thought I was a genius then. Boy, I had them fooled. But we're at the field day at the end of first grade, and one of these male teachers from Demopolis Elementary School is hitting us the softball. And these are the two things I remember. I put my glove here, and the ball came here. And I remember seeing that ball even to this day right here, but I don't remember anything else until I'm waking up on our couch at 1205 Southmont Drive, Demopolis, Alabama. And here's my mom's face. That is the very next thing I remember seeing is my mom's face. He had called her at work. She'd come pick me up. Back then, I don't think anybody knew what a concussion was. Now it can get you out of a lot of things. But there's my mom standing right in front of me. Tim, are you okay? Are you okay? I guess I'd been kind of awake for a while. But that was my mom. Whenever you needed her, she was there, and she was there from come till can't. I mean, she took Ben. She spent a week and a half in a hospital in Birmingham, Alabama with my brother Ben, who had these maladies he was dealing with, never left his room. When I was when I was 5 years old, they took me to Druid City Hospital in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which is where I think they take the Crimson Tide when something happens to them, but I digress. And I had problems with my knees. My knees always hurt. They thought I had rheumatic fever. But that's not the real story. They never did figure out what was wrong with me, except that I'd probably be a goofy guy the rest of my life. They figured that part out. But there was a kid in the bed next to me in our room. Is that called a semi-private room? Anyway. And he was a nice kid. Had one of those little things where, the magnet where you could make guys' faces with a little iron shavings. He let me borrow it a few times. And then one day he wasn't there when I woke up. Still don't know what was wrong with him. But my mom, I'm 5 years old, and my mom told me, your little friend that you got to know there has passed away, and he's with Jesus now. And that made me feel really good and bad all at the same time. But that was my mom, even back then, facing something head on and taking it head on. I always describe my mom as having the truthfulness, the straightforwardness, and the I don't care how this affects you bluntness of a 5-year-old. She was not afraid to tell you what she thought, which I think, as I look back on my life now, there have been some times when I've done that. There's been some times when I've shied away from doing that with people. But that's a great way to lead your life. Right, Eva? When you guys got into a little discussion one time at the Pinecrest Retirement Community. And by the way, amen, Pinecrest Retirement Community. One of the great places ever. You guys split on sort of like bad terms, if in fact that's the right thing. But the next time she saw you, she hugs you, put an arm around you, and just thanks you for coming back and being her friend. My mom loved to engage. She loved to have conversations. And she even told somebody one time, Tony, I don't know if it was you or not, but she didn't think that I liked her. No, I liked my mom. I didn't. I didn't like my mom. I loved my mom. But my mom had the ability, like I said, to cut to the core of something. And she was always hoping for the best for her sons, and then who they married, and then who they had. She was always hoping for the best for them, but don't ever slack, Always give your best effort. And I'll forget my first story for the Lufkin News when I became a sports writer. I covered the Dieball at Groveton football game. And my lead the next day was the Groveton Indians massacred the Dieball Lumberjacks 35-0. And I went into a line about how this one guy had busted through the line and made things happen. And the first thing she did when she read that story was, instead of going, oh, I'm so proud of you, Tim, first thing she said was, don't you think that lead was a little harsh? Of course, you couldn't write that lead today. That's for darn sure. I don't know how it got into the paper, but it was back before editors, I guess. And the other thing was she gave me a grammar lesson. I think you mean burst through the line, not busted. There's no such word as busted. And I basically got into an argument about it then, because who likes to be told they're wrong when you got an ego the size of mine? But so then I just kind of avoided her. But that was the bluntness that she approached everything in life. And man, when you have a wife, 3 kids, 3 horses, a dog, 3 cats. You can have any one of the cats. I'll send them to you in a box. But I digress. You get carried, you get your own life going and stuff. You don't get to spend anywhere near as much time talking to the folks you love back home. And I regret some of those years. I would try to make it down here at least once a year. I always reminded people in Texas it was a 2-way street. The airlines flew both ways, at least back then. I'm not sure about today. But my mom, when we needed somebody to babysit, when my wife had her first child, Kyle Anthony May, my mom answered the call. When we need somebody to come up and help babysit Kyle, when my wife had our second kid, Corey Thomas May, my mom answered the call. I think by the time Caroline came along, we had things pretty much under control. But my mom was always there. One of the great vacations we ever took in my life was when we took my mom with us to Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron way back when, before we'd had Caroline. But she spent the whole time playing with Kyle and Corey. That was the joy of her life. When Ben married Annette, my mom immediately determined she had so many more grandkids, great-grandkids and stuff, and it just warmed her soul. You could tell what that all meant to her. And this is where I think she thought I didn't like her, is I would be sitting there when I would visit Pinecrest way back, many years ago, and she would start talking about people I had no idea who they were, and was giving me life stories, and I got to admit I was curious, but I also zoned out a little bit. But with Mom, there was almost always a quiz at the end of the lecture, whether you were paying attention. So, those conversations didn't always go that great, and I would make a beeline for a Lufkin barbecue or something, go make a food run. But yeah, I loved my mom. I mean, your mom is the one who put an arm around you when things weren't going well, and she also put a boot in your butt when you needed to do better. And without her, it's just hard to think where we'd be. And it's really funny, because I had all this stuff written down here, and not going to get to hardly any of it. But some of the best conversations, my mom was a provocateur. Tony May, he's sitting at our dinner table one afternoon, and he's raving about my mom's coleslaw. And Tony also would tell you at the drop of a hat he did not like onions. And so finally my mom couldn't keep the secret anymore. She goes, Tony, one of the main ingredients of my coleslaw is onions. Remember that, Tony? And Tony just kept eating. So there you go. She covered that for you. My mom was a provocateur. My dad hated to have a bent fork at the dinner table. When you got 4 sons and a dishwasher that we finally got a dishwasher. Remember, that was one of the great things we ever did. Sometimes forks would come out bent. And about once or twice a week, there'd be a bent fork at my dad's place at the table, because all my dad did when it came to getting ready for dinner was wash his hands. And we were sitting there, and we had a sliding glass door. This is in Lufkin, 503 Rosewood Circle. Did you guys visit last night? You know where I'm talking about. People call it a cul-de-sac now. We called it a circle, right, Tony? My dad looks at the fork, and he goes, "Good God Almighty," and he picks up the fork and runs and slides open the back door and throws that fork about as far as he could, almost to the ditch way back behind our house. And he sits back down, and my mom says, "You old fool." That's what I loved about my mom. And, I'll just close on this, because you could tell stories, a million stories about her. But back early in my life, when we were still living in Demopolis, and then as every 4 years would come along, they happened to be the Olympic years too, but who cared about that as far as my mom was concerned? This was about elections. My mom was a Democrat. My dad was a Republican. They had some, not knockdown drag-outs, because my dad wasn't that kind of guy. My mom could be she could get a little fired up, right, Tony? And because like you said, she was a redhead. But the bottom line is, she was always a Democrat. Eva, you and I talked about that earlier today. And the reason I brought my cell phone with me up here is because I didn't want to act distracted. I wanted to actually play you something. But my mom, one of the last few times where we had what I call a lucid conversation, probably middle of February, end of February. And because I was making a trip down here, Tony, every 2 weeks or so until COVID-19 came along. We weren't allowed in. And then I came in June twice, and so grateful I was there when my mom passed away, because, yeah, Mom, you meant a lot to me. But we're talking, and the TV's blaring, and it was not on Fox News, even though it always ended up that way in the mornings. But my mom would have me switch it. So I did this out of courtesy. But anyway, there's a fellow on the TV screen, and his name is Donald Trump. And you got to understand something. After a while, my mom we didn't have these what you'd call lucid conversations after about this happened. After a little while, because later it was strange. Strokes are so strange. She was like a human karaoke machine when it came to hymns. You could bring up a hymn one night. We're sitting there, and we sat there for 3 or 4 hours, and I just kept punching buttons on the karaoke machine. And she was singing not just the first line of a hymn, like the national anthem or something. She'd sing all 4 verses. And it was, but you couldn't have she didn't know where she was then. She was just coming from her soul. I mean, that speaks to her soul right there. That speaks to what touched her. And, but before that, we're having a conversation. And Trump's on the screen. And I go, Mom, because she's getting a little agitated. I said, Mom, what do you think about Donald Trump? And now I'll play this. I hope this picks up.
He lies.
What does he lie about? Just everything?
They are afraid. Say afraid. Say afraid. Oh man, he's a liar.
Oh, I didn't have the heart to tell her I'm a Republican too. But the bottom line is, that was my mom in a nutshell. She called it exactly as she saw it. No matter what sign you've got in your front yard now or what other sign you're going to put up, discourse is what makes things happen. And like I said, my mom and I would have plenty of arguments, but the next time you saw her, right, Eva, she wanted to put her arm around you and give you a hug. My mom loved people. Like I wrote in the obituary, her faith steered her life, and her interactions with you folks is what stirred her. And God bless you, Mom.
Good morning. I can't begin to tell you how hard it is to be the younger brother of 3 celebrities. I was the quiet one. My parents really didn't even think I could speak for most of my life until I got into junior high, but because there was plenty of activity going on in our house all the time. I wanted to say a couple of things here before I get started. The first thing I want to let everyone here know is our family is going to be hosting a reception for Mother at Ralph and Cuckoo's over on 59 from 1 to 3. We'd love to have everyone come by, stop by. I'd love to have you and get to greet you into that. And then I wanted to also thank some very special people. This is going to be a tough deal right here. But I'd like to first off thank Life Point Church, who just immediately stepped up to the call when I approached them 2 weeks ago about doing this. Back in June, when Mother passed away, we had intentionally postponed her memorial service until we felt like we could get to some kind of clean spot beyond COVID where we could have a service and have people there. And as the summer progressed, it just became real clear that COVID is going to be a part of us for some time. But I wanted to thank Brother Scott Reed and also Brother Andrew Galloway back here that is doing all of the sound and everything today. He's doing the streaming work for us and all, and I can't begin to express my thanks to the church. You know, that's the church that our entire family grew up in, Calvary Baptist from 1965 on, such a big part of our lives. I also want to thank Hospice in the Pines, especially Deborah, who was she was basically our contact throughout all of that in the ways that they could kind of keep us focused and keep everything in the right spiritual kind of context as we went through this. I'd like to thank Pinecrest Retirement Center just in general for the last 8 years. Pinecrest is such a wonderful place, and they do so many activities for all the residents of that, of which mother didn't participate in a single thing. She never even went down to the dining room. She had had a stroke, about 20 years earlier, so she had some paralysis. She was very self-conscious of making a mess. But the one thing that she did know, and I know Eva and Miss Carter, Miss Slusher can speak to this from their times that they visited with her, she always knew everything that was going on around Pinecrest. She would just take her walker and kind of wander around on the edges. Always knew everything happening. But Pinecrest is such a wonderful place. The last few months since Christmas, everything's just kind of been a blur. First, the rehab area, and then the skilled nursing. Those are people just cut out of a different cloth. I mean, because they're continually dealing with people at the end of life. And yet they just do it with such love, such patience, and caring. I would like to thank all of our friends in Lufkin that have been so helpful. Here with us today, as I just said, Miss Lusher, Miss Carter, Eva McKinney, all the conversations through the last few months, all your visits with my mother. And then people that are watching this being streamed right now are such a big and great part of our life. My own personal friends, Chad, my good buddy Chad here. We've been friends since 1965. And he and another friend, Keith, who couldn't be here today, I'd call them several times. They'd just meet me at the drop of a hat just to get away. Finally, my family, my boys, my new daughter-in-law, Carly, and then Felicia. Such a rock. But the main person we're thanking here today, and we're all here for today, is Julia D., Nell, Julie, Big Red, whatever the name is. And as I found in some secret documents when cleaning out of her apartment, my dad, privately that is, would refer to her as Twink. And my parents, being the frugal Depression-era kids they were, I found a box that must have been half dozen or more handmade little cards to each other. It's just true love. When I would come in over the last few years, for the last several years, I've had a lot of trips to Lufkin, back and forth, doctor's appointments, tests, all kind of things like that. And at some point, finally, last year, for those of you that know Mother, she could kind of get on a subject. And whatever that subject was that day, she would dwell on that subject, baby. I mean, she would just keep on hammering and hammering and hammering. And it could be anything from a great-grandchild to politics, whatever it is. But I finally decided, man, I can't go on like this. I like to get to the point. Let's solve it. Let's move on, And so I decided I wanted to do something where I learned more about my mother, just my mother and her life. Because, like I said at my father's funeral, or memorial service 8 years ago, when I think of my parents, I don't think of my parents as individuals. I mean, to me, they're a unit. And that's how they led us. That's how they raised us. There was never any separation there at all. They did things, they did them together. And I think really when they finally retired, they'd spent the last probably 7 to maybe 10 or 12 years even. They had these plans of retiring finally in the chemical business with my dad, doing engineering work all over the place. And they were in Houston. They had bought a lake house up on Trinity Cove on Lake Livingston, and they retired. That was their plan, was to retire to Lake Livingston. There were pictures up there you saw of my dad and I and my nephew Benjamin. We built an add-on to that house to give them more room when they got there. And I think that my parents, once they retired and got there all by themselves, they had worked their entire lives. I mean, they started out working and they continued to work forever. What they didn't ever have in that was really hobbies. They didn't ever develop any real hobbies of their own. Daddy didn't play golf. You know, their hobby really outside of their home was church and their involvement with their church. And I think once they got into Lake Livingston, living at that lake by themselves, they said, man, this 24 hours a day stuff's for the birds. And it wasn't long till they put a for sale sign in that lot and said, we're moving back to Lufkin. Those are friends. I've become aware, I think, through life, with my own life, with my good friend Lou Cooper from Houston here today, that your friends that you develop while your kids are in the growing stages. I had so many conversations with Chad through the years the same way, but Chad started earlier than I did, so I could bounce ideas and get feedback from him on proper parenthood. But I've determined that you really make some of your best friends in life during that time when you are raising your kids, because you're dealing with parents doing the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong, Ms. Carter, Ms. McKinney, I don't know, Ms. Slusher, but I think that that's where they felt like their true friends were, and that's what brought them back to Lufkin. But anyway, when I was talking to my mother, we'd go on these trips. Our typical day is I'd get up in Houston and drive up here early in the morning. She was there dressed, smiling in her apartment when I came to get her. We would go to our doctor's appointment, go through all the waiting in the waiting rooms, and then they'd move you to the next waiting room, and then the next, and then finally we'd see the doctor. That would last about 5 minutes, and then he would test, do the general checkup. We would leave there. The highlight of the day is that we would leave that somewhere right around lunchtime. We'd be in the Burger King drive-thru. Mother loved the Whopper, no cheese, no mustard. You know, we would ride around. Sometimes we'd ride around and look at things. I remember when Calvary had moved to this, or was looking at this church, we drove out and looked at this. We drove all over the place. We drove by our old house in Inwood Terrace. But we had a great time together, but the conversation was always just locked in on one thing. And so at one point there, I said, I got to change this up. I want to know more about her. So I went and found this book, and I'd encourage you all to get this if your parents are still alive and start on it now. We started on this late, so I only got probably about 40 pages into it. But it's called Your Mom's Life, Your Mother's Story in Her Words. But it's talking about all kind of things in their life. And so one of the things I want to talk, I was kind of breaking her life down into different sections here for you, the things that I learned through her and heard through her, stories I'd never heard in my entire life. But you know, Mother, like some of you ladies here today, grew up as a Depression child. I mean, she grew up a mile off the dirt road out in the woods in Coker, Alabama. And her brothers would traipse through the woods. They would go through the woods that mile every morning to get to the school bus, which was really a flatbed truck that somebody had draped a tarp over and had some loose chairs in there. That was their bus, all right? And then they would ride that to the school, all right? Mother was she was a bit of a surprise when she came along. I think she, in some ways, kind of upset the apple cart. Her and her mother had a kind of a strange relationship. Mother, I think, if we're looking back with that red hair, Mike had red hair. I think Mother was kind of hard to handle as a child, much like Mike was. And so Mother, they had a strange relationship. But one of the things that she talked about, this story came up several times. This gives you an idea how things get etched on kids when they're young. But she told me about that they had a relative who was a little bit better off than they were during this time, but actually lived up on the highway. They lived at the highway right at the bus stop. But they were a little bit better off and knew that they were a little bit better off than my mother's family. And the aunt in particular is who my mother would talk about. That she said that on rainy days when you would get out there waiting on a school bus, this aunt would let them come over to get shelter. But she wouldn't let them stand up on the porch of their nice house. She made the Dillard children go stand underneath the porch to wait on the school bus. And Mother always, I'm sure some of y'all have heard this too, but she always, when there were people like that that treated others like that in any way, she had a saying that she would say that there's a special place in hell for people like that, you know. But what she really loved as a child was her time with her dad, Obadiah Dillard, when she could have time alone with him. She told me about all kind of stories where her daddy would do things for her, like when it was time for school to start in the year. This is the time when you would come home from school in May or whenever it was, and you took off your shoes, and you didn't really get back into shoes again until school started the next year. But he would come along at some point in there with a paper sack or a piece of cardboard from a box of something, or even a flower wrapper of some kind that he would get my mother to stand on that, and he would outline her feet on that, and he would then take that with him. And the next time he was in town, he would go to the store, and I can see him over there just picking up shoes and holding them against that foot, picking out shoes to give my mother. But her real time with him was when they got to have time alone and spend time alone. And she talked about the times when they were in an area, like many areas in the country at the time, had grist mills somewhere around there. And they would do their shelled corn, which, to be honest with you, I'd heard of shelled corn my whole life, but I never had any idea really what shelled corn really meant. She told me about that, how they would shell the dry corn, much like you shell peas or something like that. But they would load up their corn at some point on the family mule. And Pappy is what we called her dad. He would put her up on top of the mule and lead the mule down 1.5 miles or 2 miles to where the grist mill was. And then while they'd put in their order, while their corn was being ground up into the grits or the corn mill or whatever, they would jump in the grist mill pond and swim. And she just loved that. Loved her dad. When she talks about her childhood too, Christmas was a time really that people had nothing, you know. And so if they could get a piece of fruit, an apple or an orange, maybe a set of pencils. This is another one of these kind of little marked times in life. Her next brother to her, Sid, was many times back in those days, it was very common that a family would pick out one of the children that they felt like was gifted. And that's where they would really put their effort on getting them to develop that gift. This brother, Sid, had a gift. He was an artist. And I won't even get into some of the things that would make her kind of get to her, but at one Christmas, they opened their packages, and she looked over, and Uncle Sid had gotten a full set of like colored pencils, all kind of different. Think of map pencils like we had in school. And she opened up her package, and it was a package of just plain old graphite black pencils, you know. But that's the kind of thing that etches into her life. You carry that forward, I think, another 20 years when she had her kids. Christmas for us was incredible on how she just wanted us to have the good things in life and expose us. Somewhere through there, she met our daddy, Benjamin Franklin May. He had come back from World War II. He was about 6 years older than her. They met, and she just said he was just the perfect gentleman. I mean, I'm not surprised with that. But I think that what they did, it was a marrying of two souls that lived a frugal and budget-conscious life their whole time. I came across papers where they were balancing their bank account at the end of the month when they were first married. There were times in there where they got to the end of the month, there's 35 cents left, you know, $2.12. But they had it down to a T, you know. But they lived a life of frugality, and that's what they did. However, on the other hand, when it came to us children, we couldn't have anything we wanted. But if there was anything we needed, no problem. Let's go, you know. And so they got married, and their first date, she was 18 years old, and he picked her up, and they went with her brother and his fiance. They went to the Alabama State Fair in Birmingham, Alabama. The biggie of the night, they had a cheeseburger together. But some of those things, some of those little letters and all from her and Dad were just incredible little glimpses into their life that I never knew existed. As a mother, you know, she was, there's a picture, in fact, it was on the slideshow. Both pictures were on the slideshow. There's a picture of her and my dad shortly after they got married. She was a young 19-year-old, vivacious, beautiful redhead. And the next picture that I saw was 5 years later. My mother's standing in front of the hospital holding me, the baby in her arms, with 3 little stair steps right beside her. So in 5 years, her life had gone from being footloose and fancy-free to now she had 4 boys to manage. She went through at least 6 years where she had 3 or more boys in cloth diapers without a dryer, all right? And hearing her stories about how she would manage all the kids while Daddy was at work, how she would manage us at a time during the winter when we had open flames, we had open gas heaters around everywhere, and how she would manage through that to go out and get the diapers hung and get on with it, get on with life. Work needed to be done, she did it, you know. You know, I joke with people about this, but it's absolutely true. A lot of our time as kids, I don't know, it might have been 2 years, but for me it was a lot of time. We would travel. We had a station wagon, and I'd always tell people that Mother could manage 4 boys with no child restraints whatsoever, nothing, not a seat belt in the whole car, but she could manage 4 boys in a station wagon with nothing but a hairbrush and her voice. Best you respond to the voice, because the hairbrush would be coming pretty quick. You know, when I think of stories with my brothers and all, the story that jumps out, just leaps right out of the pages with me, was with our brother Ben. At some point in there, he decided he wanted to take up smoking. He was probably somewhere between 16 and 18 years old. And mother would get right in to address the situation. She sent my daddy to the store to pick up some cigars. And that night when Ben came home, his curfew was 11 p.m. sharp. Many times he would drive up and actually park out in the driveway at 10:45, but intentionally wait and be walking in the door at 11 o'clock sharp. When he walked in that night, Mother walked up and kind of walked right up to him like she was going to hug him, and took a big sniff of his breath and smelled the cigarette smoke on his breath. Out came the cigars. The rest of us were in bed. Mom sat right across the table with Ben for about 2 hours smoking cigars. We'll see how much you like smoking, son. I think the way the story ended, though, is that Mother was wound up as the one getting sick at the end of that night, but she got her point made with him. He still kept smoking, but he knew she didn't like it at all, and he best not do it around her. On Tim, the thing that I remember with Tim was I was, like Chad and I were talking earlier, Chad and I were those, and our friend Mark Conway and Stacy Brumble, we were all these ones on the far right side of the class pictures. You know, that's the way they would put you, the tallest from the right going down and down to the front row. We were always tall. Tim was not that way. Tim was more of a late bloomer, and there's a picture that I remember of him in junior high where he was in the band, and he was sitting there with he had his trumpet in marching position, had his band helmet on, and my mother sitting there with her arm around him, just towering over him. All right, towering over him. But Tim was a fairly frail, thin kid throughout all of that time. But at some point there, going into, I think in their 9th grade, he was running for class president of the 9th grade class. And I'd never seen this kind of side of my mother before, but it shows you what she will do. She went to the store and bought a lot of these like Joe Weider magazines, bodybuilding magazines and things. And she sat there one night and created posters where she had a picture of Tim's little head on top of one of these muscular guys, you know, and had those all over the all over the school. I think Frank Rodriguez still became, or I forgot who it was, who won, but you did make it into the lineup. There you go. My brother Mike, I really don't have a specific story on that. I really think it was just a clash of titans there between Mike and my mother, and they both survived, and they came out loving each other on the other side. For me, the story that sticks out to me, I was the youngest of 4 boys. Ben, but between me and the oldest was only 4.5 years, all right? But in my mind, they were always much older than me because I was never in school with them really at all. And but there was one day when I was out there, I'd always watching them play. I was always sitting there in my mother's lap, kind of watching them and doing everything. I was Mom's chosen one. I was the special little boy. I was the one that drank chocolate milk until I was 14 years old, sitting in a high chair. But when I was about 5 years old or so, somewhere in there, my brothers and some of our neighbors back in Demopolis were out in the front yard playing football. And that was the day for me to enter the war. And so I went out and started playing football with them. And first crack out of the box, one of the kids hit me. And I'd never felt anything like that before in my life. And I wound up falling to the ground on my back and got the wind knocked out of me. I thought I was dying. And I got up and ran into my mother. I ran into the loving arms of my mother, who knows that I'm the chosen one, and she was going to comfort me and soothe my pain, and then maybe get on to that older kid for hitting me. But this is where the still came in that Tim was talking about. She put her arm around me and said, "Now, Tony, if you're going to play with the big boys, you can't come running inside and crying to your mama." So it was the last time I did that. And I learned a lot from that. But she instilled in all of us, just a work ethic. I think it was the way she was raised. She was raised to work. That's what you did. She told a story about her brother Smith at one time when he was a young kid in junior high, somewhere in there. He came home from school one day with a broken arm. And, of course, it was just broken. It was just flopping there. I mean, nothing had been done with it. They weren't even sure what was wrong. But they wound up getting it set. I'm sure it was set, what you call now, bushwork or whatever, where they got some boards or something and wrapped stuff around it to straighten out his arm, and set it. Well, when at that time, one of the most important things you could do for your boys in particular, was to keep them healthy, keep them at the top condition for one of 2 options that they really had in life. That was an option to either join the service, go off and be possibly in World War II, or to join the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or whatever it was, where they would build parks and things. Well, after my Uncle Smith's arm was healed and they took the cast off, he wound up having a bend in that arm. It didn't set straight. It set with a bend. My pappy, they had a garden that they kept all the time, and my pappy took him outside right then, and they went and got a bucket, and he went and got a heavy rock and put it in that bucket, and gave it to Uncle Smith, and told him to walk laps around the garden, and he did that every day. Every day they added another rock into that bucket, until eventually his arm straightened out. And then he wound up going into, he did go into World War II, wound up settling into Rhode Island, is where he lived the rest of his life. But the work ethic, it came from all of that with my mother. If there's anything worth doing, it's worth doing right. And if there's anything worth doing, it's worth putting everything you've got into it. And the saying that she would always leave us with is, remember who you are and remember where you come from. They raised us that we're as good as anybody else. Doesn't matter where they're from, we're as good as anybody. But that we're also not better than anyone else either. It's you treat everyone the way God wants you to treat them. As a grandmother, I don't have to say it. All of y'all know how she has been with you. The sky's the limit. Really, I think Tim and Ben and Mike and I are a little bit jealous on some of the things y'all got to do. But no, she loved you guys, and I think everyone knew it that was in her life. You know, I just would like to speak last really about her spirituality. It was her life. It was her life. It guided her in everything that she did. She never wavered. Well, she might have wavered, but she always got back real quick, all right? But I can tell you this, and I feel very confident in telling you that my mother was about as believing in the Baptist doctrine of belief and living it more than just about anyone I've ever seen. She lived her life, and she died from this world without ever a single drop of alcohol going into her mouth. Not a one. And except for the cigar incident, I'm sure there was not any other cigarettes in her life either. But you know, one thing she did have there, one little secret, is, you know, back at that time, you know, the Baptists were known for not dancing, you know, that you didn't dance. But I'll tell you this, Big Red danced. She danced every time Alabama scored a touchdown. She had little jigs she would do across the den floor, just chappy as she could be. So in her life, she also lived through about 15 Alabama national championships. So Mama danced a lot in her life, all right, that nobody ever saw. I'd just like to close out this is a quote, well-known quote, that a good friend of ours in Houston had kind of reintroduced us to. His name is William Strange, but it's a quote from Abraham Lincoln, and it sums up how I feel about my mother. But the quote is, all that I am and all that I hope to be is because of my angel mother. Thank you, Mom.
Tim and Tony, thank you for everything that y'all said about your mom. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. If you would please join me in a closing prayer. Gracious and loving God, I thank you for the life of Julia Del May. And I thank you that we can be here together today. And God, as we close this service, I pray that we can remember some of the pictures that we saw, some of the things that we heard, and remember the woman that she was. And may what she believed and what she taught live on through us. And I pray that you will watch over us wherever we go and guide us. And I thank you for her life and for everything that she did, for every life and person that she touched. She knew how to make a difference in someone's life and how to help them and how to be honest and to the point. And I feel like there's some things we can take away from that. And I lift the rest of this day up to you, and may you bless our time together at Ralph and Cuckoo's, and may it be a good time. In your name, amen. As we listen to the instrumental of Amazing Grace, I invite you to leave as we end our memorial service. Thank you.